if I can bring this meeting to order. Good afternoon and welcome to this hearing of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, March 24th, 2014. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues Bob Blumenfield, Paul Koretz, and Mitchell Englander, and we're ready to begin. We'll be taking public comment prior to the discussion of today's agenda items. If we have any public comment cards, we have no public comment cards to date. Is anybody in the process of filling one out? Raise your hand. Wave the card around. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment. And that takes us then, well, first let's resolve our consent items. Members, I'd propose items 7, 9, and 10 as consent candidates. Unless there are questions or concerns about any of those. No. Mr. Blumenfield? 7, 9, and 10 as consent candidates, unless you have any concerns about those. No problem.
That's fine. Thank you. Okay.
And seeing no objection, it'll be the action of the committee to approve those recommendations on consent. That brings us then to our closed session items. And looks to me like most of the people here would be here for closed session, so I think we'll go ahead and just stay here. So let's go ahead and retire to closed session. First of all, is there anybody wishing to offer any comment on the closed session items? Okay, seeing none, comment on items 1 through 5 is now closed, and we will go to closed session. And we'll begin with item number 1. All right. Thank you all for your patience. We've completed our closed session. We're back in open session now, and next item on the agenda will be item number 6.
Item number 6 is City Administrative Officer and Department of Water and Power to provide verbal report on options for adding staff to the Personnel Department dedicated to expediting the hiring of DWP customer service representatives and meter readers.
Jody Oxheimer with the CAO.
And Wendy Yancey with Water and Power.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So in terms of options for adding resources for the personnel department to address exam concerns for DWP, there are a couple of things that the City Council can do on an interim basis. The question does have to be, I think, discussed in the broader context, sort of the bigger picture of overall exam requirements for DWP, but the council can, on an interim basis, authorize substitute positions or resolution authority positions for the personnel department. And we can work with DWP and the personnel department and present something in writing for the city clerk to move that forward.
And currently, we do actually have a couple positions over at personnel to help with exams, et cetera, and we are willing to actually add more as necessary. As it relates to the customer service representative and the meter readers, we have come a long way. Exams have been given. We're in the process of getting some relief, if you will, to extend the list for the emergency appointments, as we talked about earlier or last week. We have emergency appointments to both of those classifications, and normally those emergency appointments, after the list is formed, they go away within 60 days. But we've actually found a way, working with personnel found a way, to actually extend that list so that we don't necessarily, so that we'll have some continuity in those classes and with the skill set that those folks are learning. So again, we've come a long way, and we've made a lot of headway as it relates to the customer service rep and the meter reader. And we're going to have larger and longer conversations about ongoing, because there are a number of exams that are in the queue that need to be given.
So I appreciate that we have come a long way, but I want to drill down with a little bit more specificity on that. It has been a great frustration that there's been such a long period of time in getting fully staffed with these CSRs and the meter readers that people are still experiencing more than 30 minutes average wait time when they call. People can't understand how that can still be the case when this has been in the news for months. And we all understand that, part of the reason for that is that there is a process of hiring, of training, and so on before those folks can get online. But I think I can speak to a person for every member of council, I suspect, wants this to be done yesterday. And so the point of this motion is the fact that we haven't gotten fully staffed up even now, and we are still working with emergency positions, which do rotate out after 60 days typically. What does this council need to do today to ensure that by next week we will have as many people as you need to complete this job? That's what I'm looking for it to happen. So first of all, that's one question. Second, with regard to the emergency positions, what exactly is going to happen to those positions? You said that they could possibly be extended, but what does that mean? Will they become 90-day positions? Will they become 6-month positions?
6 months.
6-month positions? Okay.
And let me clarify. That only kicks in a situation where, for example, if there's a list, we go to the list. If the person may not be on the list but has the training, then we have that much longer to use the skill set that we've taught them, that it took 3-4 weeks to learn. So right now you have folks that are emergency appointment, they're in training, it takes a few weeks for training. If for some reason they don't land on the list in the appropriate position, we could still extend it for a total of 6 months.
The extension, yes. Typically, once a list is established, the emergency appointments would have to be brought down within 60 days. The Civil Service Commission can extend it, and a report and recommendations going forward on April 10th, well before any emergencies would be falling off, to extend it 6 months from the date the lists are established.
And so we would be able to utilize those folks. There'd be an overlap.
But that's dependent on Civil Service Commission
Exactly.
approval of the extension.
It will go as a routine item before the commission, unless they call it out. But it will go as a routine item, I believe. I'm sorry. My name is Don Harrahill with Personnel. Sorry to introduce myself.
Okay. Is that going to be sufficient, though, to be able to get sufficient staffing to respond to everybody's calls within a timely amount of time, to get the meter readers out there to correct bills? is that extension alone enough? Because it doesn't sound to me as if it would be.
Well, the extension is just, it's not alone in that. Then you also have a viable list to
Right.
pull from. So when we talk about the extension, there are 50 people now that were hired for customer service representative in the emergency format. And then you'll have an actual viable list to actually pull from that also.
Okay,
And
what's
they
the
have had at
status-
least,
What's the status of that list now?
there's been 2 exams that I know of for CSR.
Yes, they have had, I believe, just a recent administration about a week or so ago. I apologize. I don't know the status of that, but we are very close to completing that, the initial administration of the exam for customer service rep.
Okay, so you're still testing. So what's the status of the list as of today, and what do we expect it to be 2 weeks from now?
I don't know the endpoint. Most of what we have to do has been completed. I don't know exactly how many days it will take or weeks. I'd have to check. I apologize. I don't know the exact status.
Okay.
But we're very close to getting the list.
And then in terms of hiring off of that list, is this happening in an expedited fashion? Are we hitting delays for any other reason, managed hiring or otherwise? Is there any kind of
No,
delay in that?
no other delays.
Okay, so as soon as you have a list of qualified people who've tested, you're ready to completely staff up and meet all of your needs to be able to respond timely to the customer calls and to read all of the meters.
After training, yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Blumenfield.
The relationship between the list and the 50 people that are hired, are they on that list, or will they be on that list? Are they, what's the cross?
We actually don't know. The hope is that they would, but we actually don't know if they're on that list just yet.
To get on that list, that means they had to apply and take a test.
Exactly.
To get in the 50, to be one of the 50 emergency people, it just means they had to be applying and taking the test. Was there any sort of preference given to people who were applying to get on the list to be hired for that emergency spot?
They are able to take the exam. We reviewed their apps and put them on emergency, and they were able to take the exam. But how well they do on the exam is
So the relationship between the lists, if they all pass the exam, all
they
the
have to be reachable. They have to be reachable in order to be appointed.
reachable? What do you mean?
Meaning they have to be high enough on the eligible list in order to be appointed to the vacancies, or other candidates will.
But presumably all of them are trying.
Yes.
So all 50 of the people we've hired in the emergency capacity have taken the exam and are trying to get high enough on that list to be hired.
Yes.
And any of them that score high enough will be hired once that process happens.
Yes.
And so then the question is just the people who don't score high enough, they don't get any credit for the fact that they've been doing the job for 6 months.
Correct.
They don't get to retake the test with their new knowledge. I mean, that's the one sort of pity to this, is that you've got 6 months of investment, someone who may be on the bubble, but after 6 months of training would actually be a better candidate. There's no way to reflect that equitably, I guess.
Well, in terms of the exam, however, that will take into account their experience and their ability relative to the other candidates.
Except they took the exam before they started working the emergency job.
No,
No.
they were already on emergency.
Okay.
It's not the same exam. When you get picked up on an emergency appointment, it's not an exam.
Right.
Okay.
But when you take the exam, it's at the beginning or before you start the emergency work. Right? When do they take
Not in
the
this scenario.
You can wind up on, yes, someone can be put on an emergency appointment based on operational needs before an exam is even requested. It usually comes, typically, the exam is requested at the time an emergency appointment is put on. So most emergencies are on board
Prior to.
for considerably prior to the start of the exam.
And then,
Not always, but often.
And then the exam would happen in their first couple of weeks, first month on the job, something like that?
Could be longer. They could be on emergency much longer.
So it could be up to a year. So a department, and I'm going to ask Don to correct me if I speak incorrectly to the process, but department identifies an operational need. A list is not currently available. they're able to fill the position. They appoint somebody on an emergency basis. The personnel department is notified that an emergency appointment has been made and I think approves it because they want to make sure the person is qualified. That then triggers an exam. So then the personnel department puts that exam high on the priority list in the queue of exams that are pending. And the person who is currently filling the position on an emergency basis has an opportunity to compete with all of the other candidates who've applied for that job. A list is then established, and I was smiling because I didn't really appreciate how many terms we take for granted. The charter dictates how many people can interview for a position once the exam is established, and we refer to those people as being reachable on the list. So if you're if you have a high enough score to be able to get a cert to then interview for the position, then you're reachable on that list.
But at the very least, we know that the people who have been hired temporarily will at least have gotten to take the exam.
Yes.
Yes.
All of them will have at least had that opportunity before their time expires.
Yes.
Right, they would have an opportunity to compete.
Got it. And another question, is there sufficient management oversight for all these folks that we have in terms of personnel? Have we had to hire new managers?
Not yet at the department. Are you talking about personnel or DWP?
Yeah, this personnel. In personnel.
Personnel department.
To deal with all of this new influx.
So for the additional positions that would be added to the personnel department for people who would work as exam analysts,
Well, there are a considerable number of exams that have been requested by Department of Water and Power, over 50 at least, and probably more, maybe, I understand, coming our way. So we do need additional assistance in terms of resources as far as exam analysts.
and so the positions would probably look like a mix of senior staff and analyst staff, if you will. But exactly what that will look like, we'll need to work with the personnel department and DWP to figure out, to make sure that there's the proper supervision and support.
Thank you.
And that administrative process is reimbursable by DWP,
Yes.
right? Okay. Mr. Bonin?
What is the average wait time now for a customer service call for a billing problem?
It varies throughout the day, but I did learn today it was at slow last week, it's 15 minutes. And when we were in committee, it was upwards of an hour last Wednesday.
Last Wednesday.
Last Wednesday.
When these positions are filled, what do we anticipate the wait time will be? Or what percentage decrease in wait time?
I'm not 100% sure, but what we're reaching for is what's acceptable in the industry-wide, and I've heard less than 5 minutes. I don't know if it's 3 minutes. I don't know what 3 is sticking in my head, but definitely less than 5 minutes.
So less than 5 minutes is what our goal is with these positions.
Or less, yes.
When someone calls with a billing problem, to get it fixed, do they need to have a meter reader go out and verify something before the fix is made?
Not necessarily.
Okay. And this is still, do we know what percentage of DWP customers have been hit with the billing problem, the incorrect billing?
Overall, I don't think that number has changed. It's less than about 3% of our customers. But again, we have 1.4 million.
And do we know who all of them are? Or do we not
Yes.
know until they contact us?
I don't know what percentage we don't know about without being contacted, but for the most part, as recent as this morning, we know of all of the problems out there and who they belong to.
So if someone has a problem and they haven't reached out to us, or they called and hung up and didn't do it before the callback system was implemented, do we now have a way of reaching them?
Yes, actually in the system, because before they went through this changeover, if you will, we tried to clean up all our data, which included contact information. And so there have been phone calls that have gone out to our customers, and not necessarily coming through my office, which, you know, you guys could contact me directly, but there have been calls made to assist customers without our intervention, if you will.
So particularly after all these positions have come online, I should be extremely unlikely to encounter a constituent who has a a problem with the new billing system and had an exorbitantly high bill who hasn't been contacted?
That should be the case.
Because for a while I had folks in a neighborhood who knew about it and folks who didn't and were just sort of blithely paying their bills, and some of them were seniors and weren't aware of the stuff.
So what I will say is, since last fall, the number of calls to my office, if you will, have decreased. And the calls that I am getting now, at least when I look them up, the meters have been read. And that's a big plus, because then we know that at least the bill is accurate. And if they've received it, and we could see the history and determine that the bill is accurate and it can be paid. That's a big difference from last fall, what we were experiencing.
Do the meter readers usually work 6 days a week? Or is that...
No, but they have been working extended hours and days during this period.
And they'll continue to through this until we fix this?
I'm going to say that until this is under control, I'm going to assume that that's going to continue.
Somebody was in my backyard Saturday before last. I just want to make sure they're actually a DWP employee.
Yes. And then also, as you recall, we're doing Saturdays. And so there are 4 different customer service centers that are open on Saturdays. It was a soft launch, if you will, this past Saturday. And we're going to ramp that up. And it was about 200 plus customers visited one of the 4 centers. Most of it was routine bill payment. And then there were a few questions about, is my bill really accurate? So I think that addition of an entire day to the customer service experience is helpful.
Are we, or do we ever do any specific outreach to senior centers?
You know what, Councilman, I don't know, and I think that's a great idea, and I will actually
I'd love to see if we could
do that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, just one question, and I've asked it before. I just want to make sure we still have the same answer. If someone's been paying triple what they should be, and they never contact us and complain and just pay their bills, at some point we will catch that and correct it, I presume, and how long would it normally take to be corrected on its own in this situation?
So once the meter's actually read, it would correct itself, if you will. As long as there's a meter that's actually been read, not estimated. Because for a while there was the estimated bills, and it's using scenario 3, and they may have received a bill that was larger than normal. So once the meter was actually read, and it can't go past 3 billing cycles before it's read. So that's, in our case, it's 6 months. But so usually within the first two billing cycles, the meter's read, it's trued up, if you will.
So worst case scenario, someone's normally got a $1,000 bill and should have a $1,000 bill, and they've gotten three $3,000 bills. So we, in essence, owe them $6,000. When we finally read their meter in 6 months, what will we do with that $6,000? How will we correct that?
That's a big dollar amount, and it would true up prior to that. But that customer, if they notice their bill is that out of whack, and we haven't contacted them,
they just pay their bill. What happens?
Then it would true up with the meter read, with the actual meter read. But that customer would probably, I haven't run into that scenario for that amount.
Did they get a refund?
No, it would be a credit on the bill, or if you do recall last fall, there was some situations where the automatic payment went awry, if you will, and we hand cut and hand delivered checks to customers that were adversely impacted by that. So the customer can call, and if they've realized, I paid this bill, it is double, triple, what have you, they call us and we will rectify that. They don't have to have a credit, if you will.
No, I'm just asking about the customer that doesn't pay any attention and pays their bills. So they're $6,000 short. Do we just credit them until it gets corrected?
Mm-hmm.
So each billing cycle, it'll say you have a $4,000 credit. You have a $3,000 credit till it pays off.
Exactly.
So if they do nothing but pay their bills, they'll still be taken care of in that way. Okay.
Mr. Englander?
Yeah, just on the other part of the auto callback features as well. Have the bugs been ironed out on that? Where are we at on that?
I think as of last Wednesday, they have taken a second look at that and made sure that customers can get that system actually works the way it was designed to work.
Because it's only working about half the time.
Exactly. So it was brought to the attention of the call center folks, and that should be fixed by now. So,
Okay.
and I will make sure we
Should be
test that
maybe
today
fixed,
and make
yeah.
sure that it's,
If we could.
Yeah. because when it worked, it was great, or it is great. Thank you.
If it works.
Yes.
Yeah, and when it works. Is there any way we can get some regular status reports on where we're at, rather than just in committee, and maybe I don't know if it's some type of internal
We can
email
share
to the
weekly
council
reports, sir.
offices, weekly reports on the status of
We're
calls,
actually,
again, what have been cleaned up, what are the issues with call center, what are the issues with the employee hirings, all the questions that were brought up. So those are the questions certainly we're getting a lot of. And then I'd asked for previously where it looks like the bulk of the calls are coming from and where the issues are regionally, if it appears that there may be some ways to sort of ComStat it, if you will, to look at, is there any one area of the city that has more problems than others, rather than just shotgun approach of trying to fix them as they come in? And have you been able to come up with any of that detail?
I would say that a lot of our customers are to the west and in the valley that have experienced some problems, but it is citywide. So for now, I think we still need to address it's a citywide issue. As it relates to the weekly reports, we actually meet weekly, not only DWP, but the CAO, the RPA, Bureau of Sanitation, et cetera. And we have a dashboard that we go over weekly, and it addresses the different issues that we're working on that we think will address our problems, whether it be the hiring, the call times, et cetera. It's all on this one-page dashboard, and I would definitely share that with your offices on a weekly basis. We actually talk about it on Friday, so it's sort of after the newsletter time, but if you don't mind being a week in arrears from the previous week, it's a dashboard, and you can actually see the different graphs and what work is being done, current and future.
I saw one of them.
Weekly.
I realize it's a citywide problem, but again, if there's a bulk of it in any one geographic location or area, that's what I'm interested in knowing.
Okay.
And specifically, if we can get some kind of breakdown of where that might occur, I'd like to see some numbers.
Okay.
So if there's any way to come up with numbers. And the reason I ask is because from what I've heard from other folks at DWP and from what I've heard from various sources, that it seems to be that it is citywide, but there's a huge bulk of it, a concentration in the valley, and with that, it's a huge percentage of that is, or the largest percentage citywide is my district. Our phones haven't stopped ringing in the district office, mostly because we have just more folks on solar, more folks on 2 meters, water meters, larger properties for the most part, higher bills, higher temperature. So just all those issues, and so it's reasonable that would be the case, but that's the feedback that I've gotten as well. So I've asked for, just so you guys know, some help. And maybe if it's one person coming to our district office once a week at a minimum to just call back those customers, or something we can do, because our staff is getting inundated and people are very upset. We try to explain the callback feature as well, and they explain back to us that they've tried and it doesn't work, or they've had a bad experience with it. So it's been very difficult. So if we can get those numbers, so we can try to make certain suggestions on how we can look for some help, it would.
And you're absolutely correct about the solar customers, though, because that was a manual billing process,
Yeah.
and they should be receiving their bills. If they haven't received them, and unfortunately this is the first bill they would have received in a while, and if they haven't received them by now,
Again, yeah.
I'm sorry?
Which is why our phones are
They're
ringing
just
again.
receiving their
They're just
bills.
getting that bill again. So we need help. Their phones are they're literally just ringing all day, every day. I don't know if anybody else is experiencing that, but it's...
Yeah.
So having that dashboard, looking at the numbers of where those are coming in and trying to figure out how to triage it outside of the department, but into those communities would be extremely helpful, and as quickly as possible would be great.
Okay.
Any time frame on what it would take to put something together and extract some of the data and actually just share some of that information?
Where the specific calls are coming from?
Yeah, the call volumes and
Yeah, well,
areas of the city?
I can look into that when I get back to the office and see
Fantastic.
where that's going and let you know. But again, 3, 11, and 12, very vocal. And yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Blumenfield, anything further? So just so that we're clear on this, does personnel require any additional staffing in order to meet DWP's needs in staffing up on the CSRs, doing the testing, and on the meter readers at this point, or are we?
Insofar as they're almost completed, I would say no.
Okay.
But just a reminder, too, that we've focused our resources to, over the past, few weeks, months, on these 2 exams, and that takes resources away from other DWP exams, which now we're going to have to go back and try and move them as quickly as possible. So assistance would be helpful.
Okay. This is clearly, I think, all of our first priority for DWP right now, but I don't know what those other testing areas are that are falling behind.
Solar rebates, there are a number of tests that we need to staff up for.
Okay. Well, that should probably be the subject of a separate discussion, because what we're trying to address right here is the CSRs and the meter readers. But if there is a need for that, I would encourage you to bring it forward so that we can address that here, and also on the PAW committee.
Councilmember, I think as the budget is for next fiscal year is proposed and released, that would provide an ample opportunity for you to discuss those other resource needs as well.
Probably, but if it's a short-term urgent situation, then I think we need to know about it in a short-term urgent way. I mean, that was certainly the problem with the CSRs and the others. So, okay, anything further on this, members? I think that was just information only. So thank you very much. Appreciate your jumping on this right away. That brings us to item number 7. No, we've already done
Number 8.
Number 7.
Item number 8 is the City Administrative Officer report relative to the Department of General Services report back on petroleum expenditures with an update on fuel consumption, budget, and expenditures.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Rene V. Augustine with General Services. This report addresses the committee's request during discussions relative to the first financial status report of this fiscal year. The committee requested the amount budgeted and the amount actually expended for petroleum in each of the past 5 years. GSD had previously provided the information in a report dated March 28th, which we recently disseminated to members of the committee. This report before you today has been revised and updated with actual expenditures from the previous fiscal year. So in summary, the report shows that although forecasting the annual fuel budget is challenging due to the volatile market nature of fuel, I'm happy to report that GSD's methodology in predicting the cost of its annual fuel usage has yielded a 93% accuracy rate when averaged over a 6-year period. With that, I'd open it up to questions.
Mr. Blumenfield, I think you initiated this, at least most recently. We've talked about it through a number of budget cycles, but you had recent questions.
Sure. So we've downsized our workforce over the last several years. Has it been a proportionate downsizing in the fleet size as well that uses fuel?
Yes, the consumption of fuel has decreased over a period, over the last 6 years. And for instance, if you look at the table there, 2008 it was 16.5 million. Now we're down to 15.9. So there has been a decrease in consumption.
Is it proportional to the workforce, or has there been any?
The fleet size has decreased, and also there has been a switch from diesel to unleaded, and from LNG to from diesel. So there has been a decrease in diesel consumption over that period.
Because I was trying to figure out where it's hard to track exactly where all those things happen, like when we switch to compressed natural gas, or when we switch to, as we move more electric vehicles, and how that impacts our fuel usage. Because hopefully it's a continued trend. I mean, is there,
Certainly. LNG, we started using LNG back in fiscal year 2006 and 2007, and back then our consumption was only 2 million, and our diesel consumption was 5.7 million at that time. Last fiscal year, LNG consumption increased to 4.4 million, and diesel consumption has decreased to 3.9 million.
sounds good. It's hard for me to keep that all in my head as far as how that's rolling, but that sounds good. Other issues in terms of, I know we've expanded the use of our trash trucks and other trucks a longer period of time, and they become less fuel efficient in their, as you go sort of beyond the ideal timing and probably the 7 to 10 year range. Have you been seeing that impacting the price of fuel as well, and the kind of extensions we've had on our vehicles across the fleet?
Unfortunately, that would be very hard to correlate in terms of we'd have to actually look in our vehicle management system if that's even available data.
Angela Sherrick, Bright, Department of General Services, and you wouldn't actually see that in the fuel as much as you would see it in the parts budget. So the older the fleet, the more funding that we would actually spend on parts. So you would see an increase in the parts budget as the vehicles become older in the fleet.
You wouldn't see it in the fuel efficiency.
You would see some, but as Renee said, we would actually have to track it specifically by vehicle, because there are a lot of other variables that would actually affect and where the vehicles are actually used. For instance, there are some routes that are more hilly, and so you would see more fuel usage there than you would on a flat route. So there are a lot of variables that go into determining how much fuel is used on a specific truck.
It's hard to get the control. And then in terms of the negotiation for the fuel prices, have we tried partnering to get a bigger economies of scale with the proprietaries and LAWA and all that? Is that worth doing?
That is something that we have looked into before. We actually partnered with on a regional basis with LA County, and also nationally with other states, and it was determined that it was not favorable to pricing for the city.
Why is that?
I'm sorry?
I said, why is that? I mean, you'd think intuitively the bigger the scale, the better the price we get, but it's...
I think it's a number of factors. I think the petroleum industry is onto the consortiums in terms of putting everything together in terms of volume, but in the end, if you really look at it, it's each individual entity. You have fuel deliveries that are different for each entity. You have credit scoring requirements for each entity. So in the end, they still see it as each individual government entity, and they don't look at it as a consortium, and therefore the pricing hasn't been favorable.
Thank you.
Mr. Englander? Oh, just a quick question. On following up from the previous year's issues that we've had, did we eliminate the fuel cards as well, or is that now gone, that nobody in the city has fuel cards?
If I understand your question correctly, Councilman, it's the Voyager.
The Voyager cards, right?
Yes.
Yes.
We eliminated the Voyager cards, but there are department heads that still require the Voyager cards, as well as for alternative fuels.
Department heads still have them?
Yes.
Well,
Why? I thought we eliminated them completely from...
what we generally do with the Voyager cards is we actually, on an annual basis, actually every 2 years, we put out a letter asking department heads and asking others who use the Voyager cards to actually send in a justification to why they need them. And we actually get approval from the mayor's office if we can resubmit those cards. So we actually have submissions every 2 years, and at that point we ask for justifications. And a lot of the Voyager cards that we have right now are used for compressed natural gas. The majority of them right now that we have out for compressed natural gas. We have quite a few for some of the for some of the council offices, and the reason that we use those is that, for meetings all around the city, and sometimes the fuel sites in those areas may be closed. So we actually ask for justifications for the use of Voyager cards. So we've cut them down quite a bit, and the ones that are actually out there right now have been justified.
Do most of the council offices know that police stations are accessible 24 hours a day?
We put that information out there.
And there's a division in every council district, at least one?
When we issue the Voyager cards, we provide a location of all the fuel sites that are available and guidelines in which the Voyager card is to be used.
Just because that's where an area where we've gotten in trouble in the past. We have none in my office, but that's an issue. And then the second thing is the fuel rings. Where are we with the installation of those and all the fire apparatus? That was another issue where we weren't tracking fuel, and they would override it because there were a lot of both the, I believe, PD motorcycles as well as fire department's vehicles didn't have the fuel rings, and they were going to start installing those. Have those been completed?
I believe that the fire department has began installation of these vehicle transmitters. I believe they're halfway done. They will continue. I believe it's a funding issue, and we'll continue installing these transmitters on the vehicles.
I thought we fully funded it.
The fire department actually has, they have a different fleet director. So we do meet on every 2 weeks with the fire department, and we ask for an update as to where they are. So when we say they're about 50% complete, we would actually have to check with them specifically to determine where they actually are.
Okay. Can we get a written report?
Sure, we can ask the fire department for that.
Okay, thank you.
With respect to the motorcycles, those are very difficult to install the fuel rings on. In fact, we've actually had a pilot project with our vendor, EJ Ward. And because we haven't been successful up to this point, they still have fuel cards. But again, it's specific to the motorcycle officers.
Anything further on this, members? All right. Thank you very much. That was informational only, so we appreciate your bringing that forward. And congratulations on some good numbers.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us to item number 11.
Item number 11 is City Administrative Officer Report entitled Staying the Course relative to a summary of fiscal policy recommendations proposed for implementation over the next 3 years.
Santana, welcome.
Good afternoon. We had the opportunity to present our report to all of you last week, so I won't go through that. Here to be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, well,
Should we go through each one?
I think we should focus strictly on the recommendations.
Would you like me to walk through them again, or?
I don't think it's necessary unless we have questions as to particular ones. So why don't we go through it one by one and see if anybody has any questions. Well, let me ask you first. I mean, some of these, as a broad general matter, a number of these deal with policy areas, many of which, not fiscal policies, but policies, that are already being considered by various of the council committees outside of this committee. What do you see as the appropriate way forward for integrating the action of the various council committees and the council with these recommendations, especially to the extent that these go beyond this budget itself?
So the way we've done this in the past is that we submit sort of separate reports on each one of these issues. So, in the previous 4 reports, we present sort of an overview of the report, and then we come back, and each item is somewhat handled separately because there's a lot more work that needs to be done on every single item. And at that point, when we issue a separate report, then it goes to the appropriate committee. So the immediate example of that I have in mind is a few years ago we recommended privatizing the convention center. And so that was in the broader report. The action to do that took several years, right? So it went through the policy committee first to direct us to issue an RFP, and then to your committee and then full council, and then we went through the RFP process. So it's essentially another way of looking at this is sort of a work plan for my office. And it doesn't mean this is all we're working on, but this gives you a sense of the kind of direction that we are moving forward. But each item will come based on sort of the ripeness of the issue and how far along we are in developing it. And then it's presented to the respective committee.
Okay. So with that in mind, members, any thoughts about recommendation number 1, eliminating the structural deficit by 2018? Mr. Kretz?
Oh, I just ask that's a pretty broad goal. What's your process to actually approach that?
So we've spent some time discussing that within my office, and what we would propose is, as an example of that, is that whenever there's a matter that involves the budget, based on the forecast that we have, one of the things that we should report to you on a regular basis is whether this item helps decrease the deficit as projected or increase it. We sometimes do it on an ad hoc basis. I think my office should get into the habit of reporting that on a more ongoing basis. If really the objective is to get to structural balance by 2018, that doesn't just happen in one fell swoop. It happens incrementally, in some cases issue by issue or labor contract by labor contract. So it would be a directive to request that we get into the practice of doing that kind of assessment. We currently, in each one of our reports, we have the fiscal impact. But part of that would be to include that as well.
So will you also look at, on a planning basis, the bigger picture of items that we can resolve? Because I think it's one thing and not a bad idea to report on significant items that might impact it, but also I think you need some sort of a strategy over the next 5 years, or I don't think it happens if all you're doing is doing that kind of reporting.
Right, and like I mentioned in the rest of the items, what we would recommend is that we come back to you, develop a specific proposal and policy directive on how we would recommend approaching that, so that this is not just your only bite at the apple in terms of thinking about this issue. Is really, if your committee and council are ultimately think it's reasonable to reach that goal, then the next step would be to direct us to come back, well, how would we do that? And so that would be a separate item for discussion all into itself.
Even that instruction itself would be a separate item.
That's right.
Simply
right.
stating it as a goal.
Exactly. So how do we achieve that, right? So as part of the budget, at the end of the budget process, my office issues a forecast. We submit a forecast to your offices once the mayor's budget gets released, and then we revise it once the budget is put to rest. And then we submit it to investors, and it's part of our exhibits for the TRAN and other things. I think incorporating that as a regular discussion item, I think it's helpful. How do we get to that forecast? What are our assumptions on revenue? What are our assumptions on expenditures? Really drilling down a little bit more. And ultimately, what flexibility do we have to ultimately get to a zero deficit? That in itself merits a separate discussion, not just in the budget process, but perhaps sort of separate in the same way we have Revenue Day, from time to time. So we would submit a separate report on exactly how we recommend facilitating getting to that goal.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah, I think getting the structural deficit in order is key priority. I don't know where 2018 versus 2017 versus 2020, or where that goal came in as a year? Is that
We set that target based on where we see the forecast going today, based on, so, you know, we still have deficit projected out. Hopefully they're getting smaller. And so we thought it would be not easy, but not impossible to get to zero. If the goal was next year, I could tell you today that that's impossible. If the goal was 2 years from now, I could say it'd still be tough. But it was based on the trend line that we're seeing now. And so that would be back what we will report to you is if we wanted to get there, what does that mean in terms of what should we assume revenue should be growing by? You know, we can't control the larger economy. So if we want to see revenue grow by 4% each year, what can we do to see that happen? And the same thing on the expenditure line.
obviously there's always, I mean, you get the compounding effect with, if you have a structural problem and you solve it early, then you don't have
then you had, right.
that compounded
Right.
one-time costs over time.
Right, and having a discussion, I know that the CLA always asks our office during the budget is to sort of analyze the mayor's budget and discuss it from the solutions that before you, how much of them are ongoing, how much of them are one-time, and obviously that has a direct impact on the following year. That's really a question about what does this mean. So we use the budget as an opportunity to have that conversation. Well, we're recommending that it be beyond just the budget, that it should be sort of at the forefront of sort of our strategies about how do we get to that ultimate goal.
Not moving us to this PAYGO system, but using a lens somewhat like that so that we can look at every major decision in the context of
That's right.
its impact on the
That's
structure.
correct.
Which makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay, so everybody's on board with eliminating the structural deficit? We're down with that? All right, so we're good with number one. Number two, the only comment I have on increasing the reserve fund, obviously that's, I think, moving to 10% is a worthy long-term goal. I want to make clear that by suggesting this, we're not changing the direction of our financial policies. This is a goal, it's aspirational, and it's something to move towards, but this in itself does not change our financial policies from the current 5%, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and we're certainly not striving to get there within a year. This is a
No,
long-term goal.
again, that would be an impossible task.
All right. Any other questions on that one, number two?
Oh,
Mr. Englander?
no, not on number two.
Okay. Number three. We're good with number three. Number four. Sounds very good. Number five.
And numbers are off. Number 5 is the capital programs?
No,
federal
number
grants?
5 is I think the intention here is to try to avoid backfilling federal cuts in funding with general fund money where we can.
And if you are, because the program is a worthwhile program, doing it in the context of everything else that we do, right? So
Right.
not treating it as something different, but rather this is a clear priority for the city. It's put in the context of everything else we do, so that so we're doing it eyes wide open in terms of what it means in terms of the overall priorities of the city.
Mr. Kretz.
Well, I think that's important to say because the way it's phrased, it sort of implied, well, the federal government cut some of our programs and we're trying to limit how much of that we backfill. But I don't think what you're saying is actually that. What you're saying is we just view it in the context of everything else. We don't automatically backfill it, but we don't automatically cut it either, because it well may be this particular program is a higher priority than some of our generally funded programs. We were just fortunate that the federal government was covering it.
I mean, and that's something that's been done in the past around senior meals, for example. You know, there's there was a concern when the federal government started cutting that program that it was still a priority, and it was done in the context of the department's budget, frankly. And so each one of these issues or programs would be identified and discussed sort of on its own, but I think it's important to have it in the larger framework.
So I think some of the wording there tripped a few of us up.
Okay.
I would suggest the following language: limit the reliance of the general fund to offset federal cuts to grants, and to consider city funding for services supported by these sources in the context of all other city services, or in the context of the budget for all city services.
Okay.
Yes.
I assume our strategy, though, on dealing with the CDBG cuts is still to try to find some sort of swap with other special funds, to be able to swap special funds that could be paid for by general funds as a way to meet those needs without actually losing current general fund priority.
Yeah, and consistent with sort of the legal requirements of each program. So, I think each one of them has its own set of limitations and conditions in relation to backfilling and that sort of thing. We have to be mindful that we don't do that. But of course, I think that's whatever each one of them could really have a different kind of strategy, right?
But our first priority is still, if legally and appropriate, finding an appropriate special fund swap.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on that, members? All right. So number 6, the capital investment policy. Seems like mom and apple pie to me, unless there's questions about that one.
Well, Mr. Booth, that's the kind of thing I would love to. I mean, it's mom and apple pie. I'd love for us to do it even more than every 5 years. Maybe have a review every other year or something like that with this commitment. It's just extremely important to work on the infrastructure. So I would build in more than the 5-year, but some sort of biannual report to the committee.
Well, we in fact do that annually as part of the budget, but I think the issue here is to have a longer-term view so that we're planning ahead a little bit and not just going from year to year. So, but we do have that capital investment report as part of each annual budget.
I love my mom and apple pie too much to compare them with capital investment policy, but I won't object.
All right. Number 7, appreciate the try, Mr. Santana, but I think probably the members of this committee would feel more comfortable dealing with this separately as a policy matter rather than having a blanket approach that we would take as a budget recommendation. Am I right about that sentiment, members?
If I could,
Yeah,
there are a number of recommendations that we should discuss, and we've been working towards having a joint committee to have a presentation with both public safety and budget, so all of us can actually weigh in on that aspect of it. So I would pull that out separately for that reason.
And the many recommendations that fall within that list, which we might be all over the map on those. So as to number 7, I think we're going to defer approval of that as a separate
What if
goal.
you change the language to instead of adopt to consider and take out implement?
I think we can say consider.
Consider and implement
No,
recommendations?
just
Consider the recommendation.
Just wanted to make sure. I know.
Thank you, Mr. Englander.
No, just consider the
just making sure.
recommendations.
Great.
Consider the recommendations.
I would say review and consider, so it doesn't appear that we've actually reviewed it yet,
Got it.
And
as long as we're wordsmithing.
over the next several fiscal years, to determine if they will enable the fire department, as opposed to insofar, and rather than prejudging that they will.
To determine. Got it.
Okay. Very good. Number 8, the police workforce capacity study. Again, this is another one of those that kind of leans towards the policy area, but Mr. Englander, what's your preference on?
On 8,
That one.
it would just basically initiate a study. Is that similar to, but altogether different from the PA?
It's, again, to try to find a balance, have an independent set of eyes to help us think about the balance between the size of the police force, civilianization, and overtime. And so that we're not treating it on an episodic basis, but we're actually sort of having a plan about what is the right balance. And it may take 5 years to get there, but at least there's a path forward. And right now, we treat all of those items on an annual basis like it's the first time. And,
Okay.
and
The only language I might suggest, not to wordsmith it too much, but to add at the end of that, to say in coordination with the various policy committees, the police commission, the police department, and both the police protective league as well as the command officers, just to ensure that they're included at the beginning.
I think it's a great idea,
Okay,
so that we avoid some of the
Anything else?
mistakes of the past.
fair enough.
Yeah, very good. Let's see, I don't know that I have, oh yeah, everybody okay with 9?
Well, 9 and 10 are issues we're working on in the ITGS committee, and it would, in our serious policy issues, certainly it's motherhood and apple pie in terms of the recommendation of adopting smart policies and continuing the development. But I want to make sure that the committee has a chance to help put the flesh on those bones.
Oh, you bet.
And I don't know what the appropriate, I don't know if we want to refer it to the committee or just have it in consultation with the committee. I don't know
Well, it would go to your committee. So the first, what's being worked on now, the first stop is your committee, but we could be more explicit in that recommendation.
It's not even up to us to actually refer it to you, because you would get it in the get-go. This is adopt a short and long-term plan, but that plan comes entirely through your committee.
Okay. These are big priorities for the committee. I want to make sure that we're...
It was an endorsement of the work that you're doing in relation to that.
Oh, well,
And not to get ahead of your committee's work on this, Mr. Blumenfield, but the one thing I would offer as a suggestion on number 10 is, since we are talking about developing and implementing customer relationship management system, I think it's important that be universally applicable across departments, so that we don't have 6 different customer relationship systems, but we have a single universally adopted
That's number 10.
CRM system on number 10.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Number 11 is already being worked on based on the committee, the Economic Development Committee. And so the CLA and my office are currently working on a report on number 11.
I have an issue with that one. I have no problem with doing that, but I think it's too narrow. In my district, the crisis we have is not a lack of economic development, but a lack of and a growing lack of affordable housing. And due to the cost of land on the west side, it's almost impossible for a developer, affordable, nonprofit or for-profit developer to build affordable housing. And one of the few places that it's ever going to be possible, is if we use the city land that we have. And I don't want us to come out with, every time we do something that incentivizes economic development, 3 council districts that need it will get a couple people knocking on their door, and I have like a whole platoon banging on my planning director's door. So I would like to see us also look at the opportunities for not just economic development, but affordable housing. So could this say use of underutilized properties to enhance economic development efforts and affordable housing, and then include housing department in the mix? Would that be okay?
Got it.
And that's as part of that is also this also, in addition to the Economic Development Corporation, this is the ITGS committee as well, making sure general services is part of it, and that's the other piece of that committee. So I want to make sure that we are fully engaged in this one as well.
Okay.
Our chair has a furrowed brow, though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very sensitive to what you're talking about, and the phenomenon you're describing makes sense. I just wonder if it takes us off of the point of this, though, because if you know, some might argue, well, then we should also consider whether city property should be used for open space protection, or you know, any number of other things that are important priorities of the city as well, all of which diverts the attention from the focus, which is how do we create more jobs. And I just wonder if there's not some way that, rather than sort of equating economic development with other policy objectives, if we say that the point of the economic and workforce development and the nonprofit is in fact to create jobs, but the strategic plan takes into account those other important priorities in developing the strategic plan to get us to the creation of jobs. That's probably a poorly articulated way of saying
If this
it,
were about the purpose of the economic and workforce development and the nonprofit, but this seems to be focused on the use of cities' real estate and cities' property. That's why I came at it that way.
And I think it's also a fair point. I don't know if we're all agreed that the top priority of use of city real estate assets is job creation either.
well, it may or may not be as to a particular property, but that's the point of creating a strategic plan, is to review the properties and to say, how can we better utilize the assets that we have available to us to compete with the many states and cities that are, you know, property away for industrial development and so on. It doesn't mean that is going to be the first priority for every property, but it's to create a plan. So,
how about if we just quit while we're ahead and just say that we're attempting to create a strategic plan for the use of those assets, but without judging what that necessarily is. I think we do need a strategic plan. We have these assets in various states of disrepair, ignored, whatever, but I don't know that we're all in agreement on where that should go.
I mean, if it's the strategic plan for the best and highest use of our real estate assets, then the folks who develop the strategic plan need to be more than just the job creation, economic development folks. If it's about an economic development strategy, then it should be about more than real estate assets.
If I could clarify, these are, as the CLA pointed out to me, they are two separate ideas. One is correct, as Mr. Koretz indicated, that there has to be a strategic plan for our assets, here at the end, right? And there's work that our two offices are doing currently to sort of examine our assets and sort of put them in different buckets. You know, how do you maximize them for city use? How do you use them for public benefit versus economic development? Beyond that, there also was a separate discussion about nonprofit, an independent nonprofit to help us when they fall into the economic development bucket, right? So for those properties that are determined that it's a good opportunity for economic development, how do you engage in that? So in some ways, it's really 11A, strategic plan for city assets, and 11B, which is for those that are deemed to be appropriate for economic development, which your council would do. Then how do we engage in that?
So let me see if this works then. What if we said in the first sentence of paragraph 11 is develop a strategic plan for the best use of city real estate assets, period. And then the next sentence would be continue to, and then strike the part about underutilized properties, just continue to enhance economic development efforts through a partnership with the department and the nonprofit.
That works. And then
Those needs.
These are our thoughts. Obviously, if you wanted to add a separate one on housing in particular, I think that would be having a 14th item or
Yeah, and it may or may not be appropriately here. It might in
Right.
fact be, especially to the extent that
Right.
it supports economic development
Right.
and revenue enhancement. It might in fact be appropriate to add a housing consideration to this.
Or mixed use.
To the
which
list,
is-
yeah.
Or, I mean, another way to do it would be develop a strategic plan for the use of city real estate assets and underutilized properties that have been allocated, earmarked, targeted for economic development purposes. Just so that it's clear that it's not any city property. It's the ones that we've determined, there's maybe 5 different properties in my district. I may want 3 for affordable housing. Say these 2 around the expo are economic development, but it's the ones we say are going to be for economic development.
But we haven't said that yet
Right.
in a lot of cases.
Right.
There might be some that, we don't know yet, but they could be.
Right.
I think, in my view, that keeping it generic allows all of that discussion to take place in the development of the strategic plan. So you just say develop a strategic plan for the best use of city real estate assets. Some of it might be economic development, some of it might be open space, some of it might be housing, some of it might be, nonprofit utilization or, any one of a number of other things.
All right.
So we're making that 2 sentences with, so it says, develop a strategic plan for the use of city real estate assets, period, continue to build toward, to enhance
Yeah, I think.
economic development efforts through a partnership, et cetera.
Was this reference to underutilized properties a reference to anything other than city assets? Did that also mean to suggest underutilized privately held properties?
I mean, there are properties that are currently not ours that belong to the successor agency, CRA. That'll be transferred over to us shortly. So that was partly what we had in mind for that. But it doesn't exclude that from happening.
Because those would become city real estate
Right,
assets once
exactly.
they're handed over. Okay, we good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, 11, 12, any comments on 12? As a goal? No? Okay. Number 13, my only concern about number 13 is it's pretty prescriptive.
Yes.
Both in terms of the type of revenue streams.
Should I consider this? Suggest we change the first word from established to, again, going back to what we've done in the previous ones, to consider.
Review
That
and
would certainly
consider.
help.
Review and consider.
Sure. That's good.
Just on the previous one, sorry, backing up, but obviously they're going to be a lot of back and forth on how that one gets played out. So we're by adopting this, we're saying look at these things.
I mean, ultimately, the direction will be coming from ERC in the context of negotiations, and there's a lot of items we discuss. These are specifically identified as in relation to the fiscal outlook for the city. So these are just general goals. Obviously, it's done in partnership with labor, as we indicated, to ensure the long-term sustainability. And it may, at the end of the day, we may do all of these, some of these other things that we haven't considered.
Is item D negotiable?
Yes.
So if all of 4 of those are in fact negotiable, perhaps we should say, we should start this off, number 12, by saying through negotiation with our labor partners, or through negotiation with labor.
Through the negotiation process or something?
Yeah, through the negotiation process, comma, maintain the civilian.
Got it.
So, just so that there's no question we're trying to
Right.
I think that
impose this.
clear.
Okay, and then on number 13, I would just like to add, for the reconstruction of the city's failed streets and sidewalks and other city priorities. Since we're reviewing and considering.
So it would be considered dedicated and ongoing revenue streams, including voter-approved tax increases for street sidewalks and lots of other stuff.
Other city priorities, yeah. All right.
Councilmembers, I did want to mention.
Follow up on one thing I mentioned at council. I would like CLA to give consideration also, and it doesn't need to be enshrined in this, to looking at cost recovery measures or developer fees or trip fees in high development areas where we could use some stuff like that for road repairs or sidewalks or shuttle systems or bicycle amenities. Wouldn't need to be citywide because that would be a disincentive in certain areas, but in areas with lots of development, those things wouldn't slow anything and could give us a potentially beneficial revenue
To
source.
maximize that.
Yeah.
Okay. Would you like that to be part of 13 or a separate one?
Separate, I guess?
Okay. So we'll add a 14, which is regarding cost recovery to maximize the city's efforts pursuant to development that's occurring in the city. Okay.
And you might want to say something in there because Mr. Bonnet's point, I think, is, as he said many times, there are different factors to be considered in different parts of the city, in different districts. You might want to add in there without creating disincentives to economic development, something like that.
In areas of high
his area
concentration.
certainly would not, for
Yeah.
example, but in others it might.
Got it.
Just so that we don't get some blue
And when they
ribbon
start calling
committee
you,
telling
you
us.
just have them yell at me.
All right. Yes.
Mr. Constantine, yes, I just want to clarify on number 12 that with respect to maintaining the civilian pension reforms, those wouldn't actually need to be negotiated. Since those are already in place, there's no need to negotiate that we maintain those reforms.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, we could add your sentence, Mr. Chairman, or that you're aligning through the negotiation process these additional issues. So A, B, C, and D. Because we've already adopted a new civilian pension tier. So,
Or maybe right after the word through.
right, yes.
So through negotiations
the negotiation
with labor
process.
intended to achieve the following solutions.
Yes.
Something like that. Good point, Mr. Stefan. Okay. Anything further on that? What action do we need to take then on this? Are we simply
Move it forward.
noting this? Or?
Move forward to council.
Okay, so as we've amended this, then we'll go ahead and, unless there's objection, members, it'll be the action of the committee to approve the report and advance it to council.
Thank you.
Anything further, Mr. Saya? Any cards? We are adjourned. Thank you.